There's last year there was about 70 nests in Connecticut, and it's amazing. When I started working for Deep in 1990, there were no nesting pairs. By 1992, the first nesting pair up in Barkhamsted. This photo is right next to the Quinnipiac River. It was Hanover Pond is a dam that at the Quinnipiac River in Meriden, and a pair hang out there all the time fishing for food, and they nest nearby in Cheshire. And there's several nests now right along the Quinnipiac River here locally. So it is amazing to see it. It's beautiful to see it, and as our national symbol. The other success story that I want to just share before I start my talk, and we know that Ben Franklin wanted this bird as the national symbol, and I can understand why. It is a beautiful bird. It doesn't migrate, but this is one of my favorite videos I took a few years ago in the early morning with the sun on an angle coming up, and this tom is strutting with its fan flared, and the sun, shining through it. I just find it really majestic. It's got the red, white, and blue colors, so it is kind of patriotic. And then the snood here that's over his bill here elongates there when he's strutting around the hens there. It's an interesting characteristic of the wild turkey. And there were only, if you can imagine, in 1813, the last living wild turkey was registered to be known here in Connecticut. 1813. It was North Branford, the last recorded wild turkey. It wasn't until 1975 when wildlife biologists teamed up with the chapter of the Connecticut National Turkey Federation, using Pittman Robertson money, federal aid money. They went over to New York State and cannon netted 17 hens and 5 males and brought them back to Connecticut. And now the rest is history. We have over 30,000 wild turkeys. And Connecticut's blessed with a very diverse environment, habitat-wise, and turkeys can make their living four seasons of the year without having to migrate. So it's a beautiful animal, and it's we're lucky to have it back here in Connecticut. Just a few weeks ago, I was walking a landowner's property to talk about habitat improvements and evaluating it, and I found this nesting hen. So March 24th, there was already a nesting hen, and just seems early, but these birds, they lay 1 egg a day, and then they incubate their clutch for almost 28 days. So they spend a lot of time on the nest to incubate those eggs, and it's important that we give them space. And sometimes they nest in meadows, sometimes they nest in the forest, but it takes a lot of time and effort for these animals to make it. If you had asked me, when I started out my career in wildlife biology, if off-leash dogs were going to be a problem, I wouldn't have believed it, but it's becoming more and more of an issue. And with these birds nesting on the ground, things like the turkey, and later on we'll have ovenbirds and other birds in the whippoorwills nesting on the ground, American woodcock. It's very important that we keep our dogs under control, because they will disturb these birds and cause them to abandon nest. Okay, biological diversity. What are some of the threats? Well, the greatest threat to biological diversity is habitat loss and fragmentation. That's the number one threat to losing biological diversity. The second threat is invasive species, both plants, animals, and diseases. And it's becoming more and more apparent and more obvious about invasives as you look around the landscape. But direct habitat loss is the number one reason. And all of us here in Connecticut, we're all habitat managers. Whenever I ask an audience, who's a habitat manager? Nobody ever raises their hand. In fact, we all are habitat managers, whether we order somebody to mow a lawn or plant a tree or a flower, or whether we do it ourselves. No matter what we do on the land, and it involves soil and plants, makes us a habitat manager if we direct it, if we direct how land is managed. And it could be on a 1/4 acre lot, or it could be on a 100 acre, 200 acre forest. It could be a land trust. It could be a town property, whatever property, state or private. Whatever we do on the land determines the biological diversity, and we could direct it in any way that we want, using how we manage plants and plant and enhance areas. So what is going to be the future of Connecticut's landscape? 70% of the land is privately owned, and we know that folks' opinions, attitudes, and understanding of habitat, the quality and the quantity will determine the future of that land. So whatever we decide as the caretakers of our land here in Connecticut will determine the future. And we hope that people consider thoughtful and meaningful habitat enhancements wherever they can. And they can include, small acreages, 1/4 acre lots, or they can include bigger spaces. And if with 3 million acres in Connecticut, every square foot of that land, if we plant a native plant there, whether it's a diminutive Pennsylvania sedge, or whether it's a tall tulip tree or a white oak or whatever it is, will make a big difference for wildlife. And if there's an invasive in that 1/4 acre, in that square foot of land, if there's an invasive sitting there, whether it's a trunk or whether it's a vine or whether it's a herbaceous plant, we yank it out and we put something better in there, we will make a better landscape. I love Connecticut's landscape. I was born and raised in Connecticut, and I'm lucky to be able to work in this field. I was sitting at, my wife and I were having a picnic supper. We put some food in a picnic basket, and we went out to the reservoir here in town and sat there and enjoyed our picnic supper. And as the sun went down, I looked at, wow, look at how bright the foliage. And so I took a couple pictures, and I'm not a great photographer. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And the beautiful landscape in Connecticut is so dependent on the choices that we make. Right now, this scene is really beautiful. And a lot of the reasons people love New England and Southern New England is because of this beautiful foliage, and I do too. But it depends on the native plants. The more and more you drive around in the fall, the more and more you see greenery into the fall. A lot of them are invasives, things like Norway maple and things that don't change color with the other plants. And we're lucky that there's still lots of great wild native plants out there creating this beautiful landscape for us. And the choices we make, what's in the understory of this forest is this Crescent Lake and Sighton. There's a lot of invasives under there. We hope that when ice storms come, that these trees that get knocked out aren't going to be replaced with invasives. Hopefully they're not. And we can direct how those forests go if we manage the understories. If we take out the Norway maples and the tree of heaven and the invasive plants, and allow these natives to thrive. Now, as a habitat manager, we need to know what are some of the ingredients, that we need to have. If we're going to create a great environment, what are some of the ingredients? You have to know what's in your toolbox, right? I always say, as habitat managers, we have to make an assessment of our tools, and then we need to know what kinds of ingredients we need to put to create this dynamic and biologically diverse environment. So what is the plant base? I'm going to be rounding these numbers down just so that you can remember them. About 2,800 different species make up the plant base in Connecticut. And how do we know that? Well, the herbarium at UConn, Dr. Meerhoff, he's passed away now, but he shared this information in one of his talks once. And there's about 2,800 native plants. Through history, we know historical botanists have taken notes, but these are the plants that are that we know make up Connecticut's environment. 1,800 of them, and I'm rounding down, were here pre-colonial settlement, meaning pre-Plymouth Rock and pre-Columbus voyages. Okay, so if we go back in time, the 1,800. Now, whenever I create a landscape improvement, or I create a habitat enhancement plan for an area, I always want to use these 1,800 native plants because they're the ones that are inextricably linked. They're connected to wildlife. They've co-evolved for thousands of years, and they have special meaning, both biological and for nutrition, for survival of the wildlife in our environment. 1,000 plants were brought in by the colonists and our ancestors, and started with the forage plants from the Plymouth Rock. When they brought over forage for their animals, there were seeds there, and there were herbs that they brought over. And then before you know it, the nursery industry were bringing in plants, and our friends, relatives all around the world brought plants over. So there's 1,000 non-natives. 97 of those 1,000 that were brought in during and after colonial settlement of Connecticut are considered invasive, and they have a legal ramification. There's a list, you can Google it, that's official list for Connecticut, and that whether you add it, when you add plants to it, they're done officially through a council, invasive plant council, that votes on it. And they look at scientific criteria to base their decisions on whether it's listed as invasive. Now, as you can see, there's 903 non-natives that aren't listed. So what about those? Well, right now, those aren't classified as invasive. So if you plant the Mugo pine, it's not going to spread around the environment. It'll stay in your yard. So it's not considered invasive. But you don't want to plant an autumn olive or a burning bush or a Norway maple, because they will spread in the environment. They are on the list, 97 invasive non-native species. So keep in mind, these are the ingredients that when you're creating this environment, you want to use the native plants, the 1,800. They're the most valuable. And the other 903 that are non-native, that aren't technically listed, sometimes you should avoid those as well, because they still displace a place where a native plant could grow. So anytime you could use those 1,800, you really supercharge the environment with biological diversity. We know that we've gone through a lot of changes in Connecticut. I just want to point this out, that back in 1810, there's a lot of pasture and fields, but they were agricultural, it was our agricultural past. And I just want to point out there were only maybe a dozen deer left in Connecticut at that time. The last living turkey, 1813. It was pretty grim for wildlife back in those days. The land was denuded from forests, and it was, pretty much all farmland. And we had a thing called the Industrial Revolution happen, the opening of the Erie Canal, and now we're back to forests. So the abandonment of our farm fields, now we have this 58% forest. And we know a lot about the quantity of this place. We know how much of acres of forest, of field, and wetlands, and paved areas, and developed areas, and water areas. We're just starting to address the quality. And part of my talk tonight, well, my whole talk is really based on addressing the quality and the quantity, because if you could reduce the negative areas that have a lot of invasives, and create an area that has more natives, you've increased the quantity or space that natives live, but also you've improved the quality of that area for our native wildlife for the seasons of the year. And it could be as simple as putting a milkweed in in your lawn area that will attract the monarch butterfly that then will lay its eggs. That increases the quantity of larval host plants for that one butterfly. It improves the quality of your yard for that monarch butterfly. That's just one example of a easy method of enhancing a habitat. So with this change from pre-Columbus to then peak agriculture to today, it's pretty dramatic. And so here forward, what's going to happen? We went through the deforestation stage, we went through reforestation, and now we're going to be in the fragmentation and deforestation. If you go back 20, 30 years, 40 years, every time you developed a 200-acre farm, another farm would be abandoned, so you'd gain forest. And so we're always kind of hovering around that 60%, 50 to 60% forest. Now, from here forward, we lose forest or we lose natural habitats, and we're not going to get them back from abandonment of farmland. That era is past. So the decisions we make are more permanent, but we can enhance acres literally 1 square foot at a time, right in your surroundings, whether it's a 1/4 acre lot or whether it's 100 acres. And with all this, a lot of people are all concerned about climate change, and it gets people really not upset, but thinking, what can we do? What are some concrete things you could do? Well, you could plant native plants. You could convert some of the invasive plant areas into native plants. It's a concrete, true way that you're going to make a difference for wildlife. And you could literally do it one plant at a time. And I can't, my work is applied science, applied habitat management. So we're creating habitat, and you can do it. We can all join in the enhancement of our habitats here in Connecticut. We can make a difference. And it's a very, tangible way to make a difference. So animals need 4 things: food, water, shelter, cover, and space. The arrangement of these 4 elements, their quality and their quantity, will create the animal's environment to survive, whether it's a hummingbird or whether it's a bald eagle, whatever animal you want to pick, or a monarch butterfly. The food, water, shelter, cover, space, and the arrangement that it's found in the environment creates the animal's habitat, the environment for it to survive. Cover is very important. It's something that we don't, as humans, we don't kind of take for granted. But if you need cover for wildlife, without cover, there's you're not going to be able to hide from a predator, seek shelter. I have there's a little icon. I can't see it, so I'm gonna have to move it up here so I can click on it, so I can show you a little video. This is a thicket. It's an Airwood Viburnum thicket, and inside that thicket is a blue jay. The blue jay's hanging out there not because it says, "Well, gee, I love this thicket, I want to hang out here." It doesn't want to get picked off by a sharp-shinned hawk or Cooper's hawk. It wants to live. So it filled its crop full of whatever food it could find, and now it's hanging out there because it doesn't want to get eaten. And we live in a house and we have cover. If it was snowing or raining, we wouldn't even know unless we look outside. But we don't necessarily think of cover the same way wildlife need it. They need it to survive. They're from predators, from things getting at them. So whenever you think of cover, you don't want to just plant a tree and put mulch around it, plant a shrub, put mulch around it. You want to get some density going, some real cover so that they can feel comfortable, either nesting or resting or seeking shelter from the cold and the wind. Evergreens provide cover too. In the middle of this slide, I have a lunch pail. Here's my lunch pail. Now you don't see it. It's right in the middle here. Evergreens make up only 10% of our environment. And so animals can hide in these covers, whether it's winter or summer or spring, because it's evergreen. And they can hide from predators all year round. And it provides thermal cover too. So it's not only beneficial for their predator avoidance, it's also for thermal cover and nesting cover. I just want to point out that creating landscapes is an art and a science. And my job today is not to steer you in a certain direction. It's just to help you recognize that every landscape, there's an art and a science in creating that landscape. This one, somebody loved making shapes, and they planted these hemlocks, and there's a few pines in the foreground, and then they planted a lawn and they mow it down, and somebody enjoys doing that. What if we did this over the entire 3 million acres of Connecticut? Obviously, if there's low plant diversity, there'll be low wildlife diversity. So if we think about the more diverse the plantings, the more diverse the opportunities for wildlife diversity. So if this landscape included some milkweed, or included some tubular flowers, or included some thickets, included some winter foods and spring foods, persistent winter foods, you'll have a more diverse landscape for wildlife. More diversity can live there. More larval foods that the butterflies can lay their eggs on. Pollinators can find flowers to find the pollen and to survive, and then to transfer their pollen to help those plants survive. So the low plant diversity means low wildlife diversity. If you have high plant diversity, you'll have high wildlife diversity. And the more native that you make them, the more you use those coevolution plants, the more biologically diverse it's going to be, the more meaningful and sustainable for wildlife. Now, we know the woolly adelgid attacked one of our very majestic, prominent evergreens, the hemlock. Hemlock can survive in 5% light. That's the most shade-tolerant tree in North America. The significance of this woolly adelgid that came in Storm Gloria, and it was on a Japanese hemlock down in the mid-Atlantic states, and it blew in, is that it started killing it off, and luckily hasn't killed it all off. But what if you made a hedge of all hemlock? You'd lose the whole hedge to this woolly adelgid, or you have to treat it. What if you made that hedge 5 different evergreens, and you didn't have to be necessarily shaped like you do with the hemlocks? You can make it more eclectic. If a disease hit it, you'd only lose maybe a 1/5 or a 1/3 of your hedgerow rather than the entire hedgerow. So whenever you think about creating landscape, think of biological diversity. It also, like the elm that died, that ended up getting Dutch elm disease from the beetle that was brought in from the European lumber. People planted them along the street sides, the elms, because they were so beautiful. And then when the disease hit them, now you have to tear down all the streets, have all one species of tree, rather than, what if you planted 7 or 8 or 10 different species of trees? Now you would not have to tear down all the, it wouldn't be a disaster. It would be a problem, but it wouldn't be a disaster. So think about biological diversity, both in your yards and on the landscape. This is one of my favorite birds, because this time of the year you'll hear so why do the mourning doves start cooing in February? Well, they are early nesters. Why? They have an advantage. They have a crop milk inside their crop right here in this sac at the base of their neck they use to store food. They can exude a crop milk to feed their young. So they're not having to go out and collect bugs to bring back to their young. They could feed on seeds, whether it's your backyard or whether it's natural seeds in the field, and they will then be able to feed their young. March 24th of this year, I was walking the rails to trails with my wife, and I'm always looking around for nesting birds, and all of a sudden I look over in the white pine, and there's a nesting mourning dove. That's pretty early, March 24th. Still pretty cold. Some parts of Connecticut even snowed during that week. Why are they nesting? Well, they have that ability to nest early. And my wife's like, how did you see this dove in the tree? I'm like, you just got to pay attention. I saw a male up in the telephone wires with a stick in its mouth. And I cued in and I looked at the evergreen, and sure enough, there's a female right here nesting on eggs, incubating eggs. It's really cool. I enjoy watching for that early nesting. Other times of the year, they will nest in deciduous trees, but early in the season, they're going to nest in the evergreens. So in your neighborhood, anytime you could cluster evergreens together and have evergreens in your neighborhood, in your yard, no matter where it is, anytime you add evergreens, you add biological diversity to the landscape. And these birds love to nest in those early on in the season. Our wild turkey, they need about 4 square miles. Just think about, they can't migrate, so they can't go to Louisiana or go down to the tropics for the winter. They have to find their spring, summer, fall, and winter foods right here in Connecticut. And biologists have determined it's about a 4 square mile area. That's why they have those muscular legs. They do a lot of walking. They don't do a lot of flying, but they do a lot of walking. They have that white breast meat because they don't migrate. They don't fly. Whereas ducks fly long distances. They have that dark breast meat, highly vascularized. Whereas the turkey has less vascularized breast meat because they don't need the oxygen for long flights. Little interesting little biological factor that you could share when you're enjoying your Thanksgiving turkey, if that's what you choose to do in the Thanksgiving period. But the more biologically diverse that landscape is, the better it is for wildlife. And we're going to talk about the benefits to meadows as well, why meadows are important for turkeys. And the bobolinks, everybody, you drive around Connecticut and you don't see the big fields anymore of hay fields. The bobolink needs the 5 or more acres of this tall grass and meadow environment, not just grass, but wildflowers. And to meet their minimum standard needs, you really need a lot bigger than that, but that's the minimum that you need for bobolinks. And of course, meadowlarks need even bigger spaces to nest and build and raise their young. They've all co-evolved with this meadow environment. If you go up to Topsmead State Forest or Goshen Wildlife Management Area, you'll find bobolinks nesting because we have plenty of meadow habitat up there. The smaller fields are just as important, though. I can't emphasize more. These smaller fields, even though they don't have bobolinks and meadowlarks, they might have bluebirds, they might have indigo buntings, they could have goldfinches, they have, hummingbirds, you have turtles, resting and looking for food. You got all this biological diversity from the butterflies. You've got monarchs finding places to lay their eggs on the milkweed. Little meadows are very important as well. So don't just think that you need a 5-acre meadow. A small meadow it's amazing the diversity you could find when you let it grow and you add diversity, wildflowers and native grasses to that environment. I want to just touch upon the landscape because some of us know what happens to the landscape, but I just want to point out that this green field here that's being hayed, it won't stay green if you don't continue to hay it or graze it, because Connecticut's land wants to turn to forest. Our climate and our soils grow forest. The only way you could stop a field from going to forest is, and you want it to grow. If you want to keep it a meadow, you have to manage it. And it's salt meadows down at the tide. If you have inundation of water, it will prevent forest from growing. Fires, mowing will stop. Grazing will stop a field from growing to forest. But it needs management. We need forest fields need to be managed in order to keep them herbaceous. And I also want to point out that there's layering to the habitat is the address of the animal. And when you look at you point anywhere on this slide, I could tell you what is associated with that area, but it's important to recognize that there's layers to vegetation, and it's not just a tree with mulch around it or one tree standing there. And the edges, wherever a field meets an edge, the softer it is, the more it transitions into the forest. Whereas here it's an abrupt edge where the lawn goes right up, the field goes right up to a tall tree. It's not as valuable as these soft edges. So when you think about the land, the softer those edges, the better it is for wildlife. And then the layers, the 4 layers. You know, when you think about creating a habitat, think about layers, vertical and horizontal layering. You know, some insight to how we think about habitat. And meadows, you know, we're going to talk about them specifically in a little bit here. Those soft edges provide nesting, resting, feeding opportunities that are very valuable to our wildlife, and also overwintering places where insects can find a place to overwinter, and wildlife can avoid predation. Now, this is a real busy slide, and all I want to do is point out that the average number of animals that live in an area from season to season is carrying capacity. If I had a 5-gallon bucket, you could only put 5 gallons in it. So the average number of animals that live in an area from season to season is dependent on the food, water, shelter, cover, and space, and the arrangement. These elements that go into carrying capacity, we have little control, minimal control, some, but minimal. What we have direct control over is the habitat, the quality and the quantity. If you want to increase the average number of animals that live in a place, you have to make that pail bigger, right? Yeah, to get 6 gallons in a 5-gallon pail, the pail has to get bigger. So say you had a yard that's all lawn, one type of grass. You add milkweed, you add some tubular flowers. Now you might get monarchs coming and laying their eggs. You might get hummingbirds coming in feeding. So you could increase the carrying capacity of your neighborhood, of your yard, by improving the quality and the quantity of habitat. And it could start one plant at a time, one species at a time. If you want to attract monarch butterflies to lay their eggs, you have to plant the Asclepias plants in your yard. If you don't do it, you're not going to get them. If you want to have hummingbirds coming in your yard, you need to have tubular flowers. The more native ones you plant, the more variety, the more likelihood you're going to sustain the hummingbird population. So the quality and the quantity of the habitat can increase the average number of animals that live in your environment sustainably if you create the environment for it. Every animal has a limiting factor, and I just want to point out that it's a thing that limits the population from growing. It tends to slow it. If it's not there, it slows it. You know, it's an environmental factor. The success of the organism is limited by the presence or absence of these factors, and it's necessary for the survival. And I already mentioned monarch butterflies. Without the milkweed, they're not going to. The chances of surviving is pretty slim because they don't have anywhere to lay their eggs. And the hummingbird needs tubular flowers. So if you start looking at your land from the perspective of limiting factors, the food, you increase the food sources, spring, summer, fall, and winter. You improve the cover. You add some evergreen cover, some thicket cover. You, instead of mowing 1,000 square feet, you take a 100 square foot area and you create a wildflower garden. So you took that out of straight lawn and you've increased the patch size for monarch butterflies or other pollinators to be able to find their resources. So there's all kinds. And then invasives, if you pluck them out, you've eliminated their competition. They're now native plants come in and colonize those areas. That's another way of improving habitat. And of course, there's other limiting factors, things like off-leash dogs. If you don't let your dog off-leash, keep it under your control, you might not disturb that nesting turkey or that nesting ground nesting ovenbird or whatever bird you have in your neighborhood. So if you remove these limiting factors or you add these elements that they need, you increase the population of whatever animals you're trying to target. And the biological diversity of the area that you're managing will improve once you start eliminating these limiting factors and recognizing what they are when you add them in. So I like to use native plants. They've adapted to the soil and climate. They co-evolve. They promote the natural habitats. Those 1,800 native plants are so valuable. I'm going to share some examples with you. My work at the state as a state biologist for over 30 years. I'm fortunate to be working at, out of Sessions Woods. I wrote the 10-year plan for it's about 764 acres, depending on how you look at it from the GIS maps and the survey map, but somewhere you might read 771. But anyway, it's over 700 acres, and we plan out 10 years and see how do we improve the biological diversity of the property. We're located at off of Route 69, Milford Street in Burlington. It's north of Bristol and, west of New Britain and east of Thomaston. So nestled there in the central part of the state, central west part of the state. We try to maintain a biologically diverse property because we want to increase it with biological diversity. We want to use scientifically guided principles. And then we let the public learn about this stuff. So if you walk our trails and when a building is opened up after this COVID period, you can see exhibits that complement what you see outside and learning about conservation and wildlife habitat management and conservation. And then you could also go there and bird watch and hike and walk and enjoy the environment there. We also have one section, a few sections, where there's a big swamp and you can, big beaver swamp, really great bird observation area. There's neat trails, the Tungus Trail, and then we also have gravel paths that are really wide and really accessible. We did an inventory of the whole property. There's 21 distinct forest stands on the property, and we inventoried the biological diversity there. And we try to, what I'm going to do for you is, we want to emphasize biological diversity in the seasons of the year. We try to provide food, water, shelter, cover space through the seasons of the year for wildlife and try to improve the biological diversity. I'm not going to talk a lot about dead or dying trees today, so I just want to share one example for you before we get going with the living plants. Here's a little here's a chickadee flying in and out of this little hole. It's a gray birch. This gray birch was about the size of my pinky back in 93, 94 when I planted it. And it was, my friend was bulldozing the edge of an orchard because he was expanding here in Southington. And when he, I said, hey, before you bulldoze that, you mind if I dig out some of the native plants there? And he goes, sure. It was in the March of the year and they weren't leafed out yet. So I took these little gray birches and I planted them along my driveway. And one day an ice storm came and after they got about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, snapped them off because they bent over and then the ice snapped them. And instead of cutting them at the bottom, I kept some 5-foot sections and I let them resprout from the bottom. And to my surprise, one day I'm driving out the driveway and my wife was next to me and I rolled down the window and here's chickadee making a nest in this little 3.5-inch snag. And you don't want trees falling on your house or dead trees falling on your car, but this is a little snag, 3.5-inch snag that's providing a cavity for this chickadee in it, and pretty cool. And you want to think about dead and dying trees, both on the ground for salamanders, but some standing ones for the the cavity nesters. So now you can throw some food in the box and get all the entertainment you want from wildlife, but I like to plant my habitat and feed my wildlife. This woodland sunflower looks very much like the black oil sunflower seed you're going to throw in a box, but a little bit smaller. And these helianthuses are perennial. They're not like the ones you buy with the big cluster, the ones that you buy, the annuals. These will perennial, they'll spread, they'll make a thicket, and you could dig them out and give them to your friends. They're very resilient. And I challenge you to try to find any seeds at the end of the October, because they get eaten up. And then the pollinators pollinate these. I tried gathering them up one time, some seeds from a patch in Harwington, and I literally had to beat away the chickadees and nuthatches, and they were just pounding away. I barely got a dozen seeds out of the patch of helianthus that I had marked off. But you could buy these on the market, and you could also, once you have a patch, you can split them and then move them around. They're very, very valuable wildlife plant. Now, I'm going to focus in on grasses and wildflowers because today's about enhancing meadows. So I'm going to focus in for you. At Sessions Woods, this is an aerial photo. You can see here's the building. Here's Route 69. I want to share with you in the openings at Sessions Woods, the grassy openings, we removed the non-native grass and we added in native grasses. And I want to share with you some of how we did that, some of the species we put in. Native grasses are amazing to have. And once you start learning what they are, what they look like, I'll tell you, you'll fall in love with them. They're amazing. These native grasses. Here's little blue stem. Here, one day I was watching these turkeys and they're bobbing their heads and they're, I'm like, what are they doing out there in this little blue stem? Thought they were chasing bugs around. About a week later, after I studied this slide, I realized this video that I took, they're stripping the seeds off of the little blue stem and filling their crop full of the little fluffy seed. And I never noticed that before. And the more, it's pretty cool to see them stripping the seeds. Little blue stem is a clump grass. It doesn't clone like your lawn where it provides a dense mat. One will be here, one there, one over there, spread around. And it provides nooks and crannies for wildflowers to grow, and then wildlife can either nest in the middle there, look for bugs, but it's a really neat environment. Then there's big blue stem. I call it turkey foot. Gets up 6 feet. Little blue stem is maybe 2.5, 3 feet. There's switchgrass, and then deer tongue grass, another native one. One winter, I was watching this junco. You walk into a field and a bunch of birds fly out. You go, what are they doing in there? They're not just hiding. They're eating little seeds. This guy, now look, he's climbing up. He's climbing up, and he's going to go to the tip. He's going to eat the little seeds that are persistent winter seeds. These are very important. Juncos actually migrate through Connecticut. They overwinter here, and then they go up north to feed. But a lot of our local birds also use this, but they are feeding on these little millet seeds that you can hardly see with the naked eye. But they're in these grass thickets. We don't let grass go to seed. You don't overwinter it. They're not going to have those opportunities. So the habitat value improves if you let the vegetation go to seed. And deer tongue grass is one of those native plants that provide that persistent seed source through the winter. When I say that you could fall in love with native grasses, you could. They're aesthetically to the eye, just eye-catching, that copper bronze color. Once you start learning it and you see it on the edges of the roads or you see them in fields, you start recognizing it and you'll realize what they are. And once you start keying in on them, you're going to really enjoy having them in your landscape, not only for biological diversity, but also the beauty of it. I want to point out that, this environment is native grasses. We create a lot of turf. And I share this statistic with you, not to malign lawns, but just to tell you how, as a biologist, habitat biologist, you have to look at what is happening to the land. And we're converting a lot of our land to lawns. About 382,000 acres get converted every year, each year. We spend a lot of time taking care of it, fertilizing it, managing it. And then this is a 2003 statistic. There's over 41 million acres created in North America. by 2023, by 2003. It's just a fact. So it's a trend. And so we need to recognize that. Lawns are not very biologically diverse. So if we could convert a portion of that lawn and try to have folks put a square meter into habitat, put 10 square meters, 100 square feet, whatever we convert will benefit biological diversity versus a monoculture of very sterile environment. And the other thing, a lot of people ask me, why do we have so many geese here in Connecticut? What's going on? Grass. We've mimicked the tundra. And geese, when they look at Connecticut, they say, gee, why do I need to fly to the tundra? I can stay right here. There's lakes and ponds and plenty of turf grass to graze and raise my young. They love to graze. This is one of my favorite. And also, they excrete about a quart a day. So the more lawns you create, the more geese are going to hang around. And the two populations, the one that migrates only grows 5% because they're hunted from Canada to the mid-Atlantic states. Their hunters will actually lease farm fields to hunt them, and there's a regulated season on them. The resident geese can grow over 50% a year, and they're the ones that create a lot of this detritus and droppings on our fields, ball fields and golf courses, and the lawns are creating that, the habitat. We've created the habitat for them. This is one of my, I get a chuckle out of this slide, trying to scare them away. This pond, if this lawn was allowed to grow into tall grass, it'd be less palatable to that. And I'm not saying that you have to do it to all places, but if you allow a meadow to turn, a lawn to turn to meadow, you have biologically diverse wildflowers, native grasses. They're not going to be as palatable to the geese as the turf, mowed turf. So keep that in mind. You could change some of there's a 360 degrees around the pond. Maybe take half of that pond and make it tall with brushy environment. The geese are not it's going to reduce their food resources and the likability of that area for geese. So you could create a field and meadow, whether it's in your own yard or whether it's in a land trust field, or whether it's a town field, you get permission and you work with the town to create a meadow, or whether it's your own, you can create meadows from a small scale to a large scale. And I hope to impress upon you that you can make a difference. Now, a lot of people put up goldfinch feeders, with the thistle in it. And does anyone ever ask themselves, what do goldfinches actually eat in the wild? Did they just need to eat thistle out of a bird feeder? Yeah, no, they eat things like evening primrose. The seeds are very prolific. I was leading a hike one day, and while the folks were talking, I took this video of this female eating the evening primrose seeds. And this is just one of the dozens of wildflower seeds that they'll eat in the fall. And they start right in the spring. They'll eat the spring persistent ones. And then as the summer goes on, there's a variety of seeds that are produced. This is one that they eat in the fall through the winter and then even early spring. Very valuable evening primrose, a wildflower. This is a video I took on my land. My wife and I, the kids, we have land out in Sprague that we've created a 5-acre meadow. And this pair of goldfinches were very tolerant. I took a nice video there. They're eating the Timothy grass. And if you don't let your meadow go to seed, you're not going to provide these seed resources to not only the goldfinches, the indigo buntings, the turkeys. There's so many things that love to eat the seeds of our meadows. And we need to consider that if we're going to create a biologically diverse meadow. everybody knows about the monarch butterfly, but I want to share with you what I've witnessed. I saw out in Hammonasset one day, my wife and I, it was late after, it was early evening, the fall in September when it gets really, stays late, but it gets cool. So it was getting cool. So we decided to go back to the car. And as I'm going back to the car, I'm watching all these monarchs flying by. I couldn't believe there were hundreds of monarchs flying by right here in Hammonasset and Madison. I couldn't believe it. I said to my wife, I've never seen this many. So anyway, I took this photo. The wind was really coming off the ocean. So it was a brisk wind. So they were landing in these evergreens along that parkway there, or the access way along the beach there. And there were hundreds and hundreds of them. And it made me think, geez, I only thought this happened in Mexico. I've never seen this many monarchs. There's about, I think this was either 2004, around that time. It's quite a while ago. But anyway, these animals, people don't think about, they think about putting buddleia out there in the environment. They put out buddleia, they attract butterflies. But is a monarch going to be able to lay its egg on a buddleia? No, it's just going to be like going to the 7-Eleven and getting a big gulp, and you gulp down a big gulp. Doesn't really do a lot for nutrition. Well, for the butterflies, it feeds their nectar, but it doesn't have any larval value. So you can put one up, but is it really helping wildlife other than our enjoyment to see them? You really want to plant milkweeds. So any of the milkweeds, the Asclepiuses, this scientific name, the genus Asclepius, there's 3 prominent ones in Connecticut, and I'll share with you what they are. But the common milkweed's important. This is a risque slide, so I'll cover it for you. This was a breeding pair on our property in Sprague, and I got a kick out of when one of my sons said, "Dad, this one's distorted. Something's wrong with it." They're helping me catalog the butterflies on the property, and we went over there and we looked. I said, "No, they're breeding," and we had floated in the seed with the little parachute seed. Pods, and then we raked them in over the years. Now we have many nest, larval sources on the property that feed the monarchs. It's really rewarding to do it. Tuberosa, Asclepius tuberosa, another one that you could consider planting in these fields. Very valuable plant. Asclepius tuberosa meaning tuberous roots, tubers. And I found out this is one I rescued from a dune project. Our DEP colleagues were creating a dune habitat, and I found this Asclepius, and I said, "Hey, before you guys bulldoze that, you mind if I dig this out and I'll bring it back?" And so the head of the time said, "Sure." And so I went to the truck, got my shovel, and I was hitting these. I thought they were big roots from a adjoining tree, but it's actually the tubers on this plant were large. And so I balled and burlapped it as best I could, and I brought it home and I put it in this big container. And to my amazement, 13 caterpillars hatched out. They had already laid eggs on it. And then funny story, my mother-in-law, father-in-law came over one day and they were bringing us fresh bread. And I'm sharing this with you because they were avid gardeners there, and they can grow enough tomatoes for 2-3 families. So they're used to killing the tomato hornworm. So my mother-in-law looks at this plant and says, "Oh, look at these caterpillars." So my wife comes to the door and says, "Don't touch that plant. It's Pete's experiment." And she's like, "Experiment? What? It's killing the plant." Well, anyway, I chimed in and said, "Yeah, we'll explain it to you. These are they're meant to be eaten by the caterpillars." So, as avid gardeners, we want to protect our plants from being eaten. But in the wild, plant like Asclepius, there's so many larval foods that we want to consider. The bugs need larval foods. It's not just the nectar. It's about where they're going to lay their eggs on. So consider that life stage of that butterfly, that it needs to eat some parts of plants to create the caterpillar that then creates the butterfly. And I'm a very practical guy. I know that we have to manage insects for for gardens, and we try to use as many organic methods as we can. But whenever we need to manage, we manage. But in the case of the milkweeds, we want to plant them as many as possible to try to restore the population of monarch butterflies. We don't want them to become threatened or endangered. And we want to reverse the trend that they're declining. We want to, and how are we going to do it? Each one of us, if each one of us decided to plant Asclepiases in our yards and in our fields and in our places that we're allowed to do that, we're going to reverse the trend, and we'll have these beautiful butterflies as part of our environment to the distant future. And that's just one species. There are dozens and dozens more that you can learn about and plant larval foods for. It's really, really exciting to be able to make a difference for wildlife. There's red milkweed, another one. It's a floodplain plant, another one that will feed the monarch caterpillars. And then, of course, you want to allow nectar sources like the goldenrods as they migrate from here, all the way down. They need to stop and feed on the goldenrods, number one nectar source that's been found to feed the monarch butterflies. And one of my favorite plants that I compare it to the buddleia. It doesn't flower as long as the buddleia, but it's amazingly fragrant. Learn this plant. It's a sweet pepper bush. You plant it, it clones, so you could dig out and give some to your friends if you want. It'll clone, make a little island of habitat. These spikes, you could smell them 100 feet away. And talk about attracting butterflies. It's amazing how many butterflies. So if you have a field, you put these on the edge of the fields along that soft edge that you want to create. It's very valuable plant for providing nectar. Then, of course, the fields are, you could plant a variety of things. The more diverse you plant the wildflowers and grasses and mix them in, the more chances you're going to have valuable habitat. And in our meadow here, it's sprayed out. It's amazing, the biological diversity ever since we've added the wildflowers and native grasses. Dozens and dozens of butterflies feeding on the nectar. There's a spice bush butterfly here that's going to feed on the nectar, then go lay its egg on a spice bush in the edge, spice bush plant, shrub, but just biologically diverse and chock full of activity. Some of my favorite, the Sphinx moths are just incredible. This is a clear-winged Sphinx moth. This is mimicking a bumblebee. Sphinx moths are amazing, and they love these tubular flowers that you can restore into meadows. Here's the hummingbird Sphinx moth, another one. When you glimpse these feeding, and you create the habitat, they will be there. You plant these tubular flowers. This is Monarda Fistulosa. It's a beautiful plant, hardy, and very easy to grow and put out there. All of these Joe Pye weeds and New England aster, New York ironweed, just beautiful to plant. This is the Viceroy. This one has this little vein going through the lower wings here. The Monarch doesn't have that, just so you differentiate it. This is the Viceroy is a mimics the Monarch. These fields, the more diverse, you might have, box turtles using it. They'll lay their eggs. They'll sun there. This is a dewberry. This is the native dewberry that will provide berries in the summer. These places are great for turtles and for all kinds of wildlife. It's a native dewberry. And of course, the hummingbirds. All your fields, anytime you add tubular flowers in the fields, on the edges of the fields, you can enhance it for hummingbirds. I've seen hummingbirds even feed on flat flowers. People think you only need the tubular ones. They will take nectar from a lot of the native, but they like the tubular flowers the best. They gather their nectar. So please plant as diverse tubular flowers as you can. I want to share with you the wild turkeys. They need fields as well. Here's a field, and I use this field. It's got a lot of clover in it, just to show the number of poults in this field. But they love to eat the protein from the bugs. They eat the bugs. They'll come in there. Mama will bring these poults in there, and they will clean up the bugs out of these fields and just gain their sustenance from the protein. I can't emphasize more the value of these meadows to provide that protein for these critters. And these are just one bird species. The other songbirds are just gleaning all the bugs out of these lawn areas, these meadow areas. I use this, a meadow that's diverse. It's hard to see poults running through it. So I didn't, I'm using this slide so you can see the poults. But when they're running through the little meadows, they have hiding places so they don't get picked off by hawks, and they're still gleaning all the bugs out of there. And then the birds love to loaf. Once it, like today, it rained. Tomorrow you'll see turkeys sitting out in the field preening and fluffing their feathers and preening because they want to clean their feathers. They can't take their jacket off, put a new jacket on. They need to have clean outer feathers. So this guy's preening his feathers. There's up to 4,000 feathers. But I found this neat observation. Watch. He's going to take his bill and he's going to go and take oil from the gland at the base of there's 2 oil glands. Pick up the oil. Now watch, he's going to put that oil on his beard. Watch. That oil's in its bill because he picked it up. Now watch, he's going to preen his beard. Now, it's just amazing how animals take care of themselves out in the wild. We have showers and we have soap, and these guys are using all their own ways to keep themselves really beautiful and clean. That beard right here is a modified feather. It's not actually hair, and it grows throughout the year. It doesn't molt. They don't molt those little beard feathers. They keep those throughout their life, so they'll get larger as they grow older. They don't molt them like their other feathers that they change them every so often. Just a beautiful little observation I wanted to share with you, the beauty of the wild turkey and how it takes care of itself. Of course, they like to scratch the ground a lot. You'll find them scratching away. These little scratch spots, they'll find, insect casings, seeds, but then that's a germinating place for a native plant to grow. They rototill the areas up, looking for food. They create, they're part of the environment. This is one of my favorite photos. I have a lot of favorite photos, but this is my son Anthony holding a poult. And on the back of this poult right here, if you look, if you look right here, this is a little blue stem grass, which I noticed years after I took the photo. I looked at it more carefully. But let me tell you the story behind this. So we're walking in our meadow. The kids were little back then in 2004. And I looked down and there's a poult frozen, like holding on to a little leaf. And I was surprised. So I had my camera. I was just taking some pictures of wildflowers, and I picked up the bird and handed it to my son Anthony. And I snapped one picture, but I wondered why this orphan bird, what's it doing here? All of a sudden the field erupted with many poults, and the hen goes with a broken wing. She's kind of clucking. And so he let the bird go, poult go, and they all followed mama off into the thicket, off away in safety. But they had all frozen. They must have seen us coming, and they all froze. And I was able to get this photo. Birds can't smell, so you don't have to worry about this bird. The mother's still going to take it because the only birds that can have a sense of smell are the vultures. The other birds have no sense of smell, so no need to worry about that. But what a cool observation. I have 2 boys, Neil and Anthony. Neil's passed away, very sad for us this last year. They both my kids and my wife are very active with me in managing our habitats. They all are habitat managers, and we all have an appreciation for this. And it's really neat as a family to do this work together. these smaller fields, I can't emphasize more how you can make a difference, and you don't need large fields. Your meadows can be as small as you want to make them, or as large as you want to make them, however much energy and time you have. Of course, the larger they are, the better, but the small ones are amazing. You can make observations that'll just floor you when you start making these meadows, these biologically diverse meadows. Now, at the state level, we make big ones. All right, so we'll make a big meadow, 2, 3, 4, 5 acres in size. We use this no-till planter. See this no-till cedar? The fluffy seed from the native grasses, you can't just throw them out there because they fly away. You know, they blow away. So this no-till cedar agitates them and puts them in the little furrow. It doesn't have to be tilled. And then there's many hoppers in there. One hopper, you put the seed, the native grass seed. Another hopper, put the wildflower seed. Another hopper, you put the nursery crop. So what we do is we look at a meadow and we figure out the soil conditions, and then we buy the soil mix. I mean the plant mix. And there's many companies you could use, but Ernst Seed Company out of Pennsylvania, they have many different. They have a variety of native, and you could make your own seed composition. That we like to have them flower during all the seasons of the year. We like to create a field that has many blossoms during the seasons, and then in native wildflowers and grasses. And then the grasses provide the bunch grasses, so there's nooks and crannies. So we want to create biologically diverse meadows. These no-till cedars are very valuable because they just break a little furrow in the ground. There's 8 little discs and we calibrate them to feed it in at a certain rate per acre. Very valuable machine, and we've created many meadows, both on state land and also on private property too, because we are allowed with to let landowners have access to it. Especially NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, works with land trusts, and they work with private landowners, and we help each other. We assist them as well to create meadows, but a valuable tool to create these meadows. You could also rake in native stuff by hand. You don't have to use the no-till cedar, but the bigger spaces is more convenient to use this no-till cedar. When to mow is very important to consider as well, and I can't emphasize more. Like I'll give you an example. We on state lands, we cut half of our fields every year, so that we can make sure they don't go to forest. And then we have agricultural agreements, but it's important that recognize that you don't want to mow during the nesting season. And I found that out, unfortunately, on my own, on our own 5-acre meadow. One year it was really wet and I couldn't mow, and the soils were soft, and I couldn't mow in March. So in February and March. So I mowed in April, and to my surprise, so I'm driving around, all of a sudden a woodcock flies, and I jammed the brakes on, and my wife was nearby watching, and I called her over because I had a sneaky suspicion that, I hope I didn't run over a nest. Well, turns out there's the woodcock. It landed about only 10, 15 feet away. And sure enough, underneath this bush hog, I found where the nest was. But luckily, I didn't crush the eggs. I got lucky. The mower was high enough up, and I didn't run over. So here you see the woodcock sitting where I didn't mow, and here's the nest. So I lifted up the bush hog, I moved over, and the nest was underneath there. And we put the cut grass and stems all around it, and she moved over and started incubating. They incubate for quite again, many, almost 28 days. And these, there's a long commitment for them. And we don't want to be mowing them over. So rule of thumb is don't mow, after March. This was April 6th. This was a field in June, a friend called me up and said, "Hey, Pete, we ran over a hen. They ran over a turkey hen sitting on 6 eggs." And that was during a June mowing. So, it's a serious thing, can happen. And you got to be careful during the nesting season. When should you mow? Well, ground nesting birds start in March through August. The likelihood of, usually by, they're done midsummer, before August 15th, but up to August 15th, they may be nesting. We mow our fields in late winter, and you want to delay that first hay if you are interested in not mowing over nesting birds, and you're going to have to decide that as the owner of a hayfield when you want to start that date. But on state land, it's July 15th. It's our first mow in order for a farmer to get the first hay. Not everybody can afford to do that, but if your goals are biological diversity, that's what you would have to consider. And then you could also consider mulch hay, which is you take the hay off at the end of the season in September, October, and then you can only have one cutting, and then it's only used for erosion control. It's not going to be used for animal feed for mulch hay. And of course, mowing half the field in late winter or in the fall will allow the overwintering of seed sources and cover for our wildlife. What I'd like to do for you, and I'm going to do just a couple examples of invasive management. These are plants that were imported, the 97 invasives that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to give you 2 examples. They degrade the habitat, they displace the native plants, they spread around after you plant them. This graph is a little busy, but I just want you to pay attention. Abundance and time. The earlier that you can knock out invasives when they're few in number early on, the less likelihood you're going to get this exponential growth, this magnification and this eruption of their population. But a lot of people do the management up here because that's when they see a lot of them out there. But we like to manage early, as much as you can early. The example I want to share with you, here's my family. These little red dots are what I call tumors on the landscape. I'm going to give you an example of Oriental bittersweet. And I share with you not only my state work, but my private work. And as a family, we've managed to knock out the Oriental bittersweet on our land. And it was not a very easy task, but I'll share with you how we did it. Oriental bittersweet, these vines can not only strangle plants, they produce these seeds that birds spread around, but they strangle the plant. And they also, the weight of the vines can actually topple a tree when it fills up with ice and snow and wind. And the distortion could it's kind of cool to see this, but it could cause the tree to die and break. We cut them, and you can see the diameter of that bittersweet vine is pretty huge. They were imported to the United States for decorative reasons, and then they escaped. But these are, I've seen them about age 40. They're not quite, they've been around about that long, and these big ones are, greater than 35 years old. We cut them, and then we paint them with brush begone or triclopyr, and we do that to kill the root. You could cut it and not do that, but you end up getting resprouts. See how they resprouted, and then they'll shoot runners on the ground, and then you'll have hundreds of propagules taken off. So I always recommend that when you cut a plant, paint it with triclopyr, especially to prevent the resprouting. If you're into organic stuff, I understand why you wouldn't do it, but I strategically use things like triclopyr, which is in brush begone, and paint it on the stem. prevents it from resprouting, and it kills the roots of the plant. We've killed over 5 to 8 acres of trees being affected by the vines, and we've been effective at keeping them out of the trees and stopping them from toppling trees. If you do that management, it has it pays off in dividends, because you can prevent native trees. Now, if you have any doubt how bad they are, they can cover up to 80–90% of the tree and kill it outright just by smothering the tree. We've lost red cedars and other trees from 100% inundation. But these dead ones, you could see if it's effective. When you cut the vine, you could prevent them from smothering the trees. And it's probably a very sustainable method. A lot of times invasive plant management is frustrating, but I'll tell you, you knock out these Oriental bittersweets by cutting them and painting the stems, you'll see the results. It's really amazing. And we do this also on state land, appropriately. And but on our own land, we're very tenacious about it. And we've been very effective. It's been very effective. Some people will say, well, so you get rid of these invasives. Is there any scientific proof that it helps anything? Well, University of Delaware, they compared 4 invaded sites and 4 native sites, and they found an amazing thing. They found out that when they compared the 2 areas, the invaded areas had 6 times fewer caterpillar species. And we know that the caterpillars feed the birds. It also had just biomass fewer caterpillars, and it's scientifically been shown. So the native sites are biologically diverse and have plenty of food resources for our wildlife. The non-native sites are poor in quality and don't feed our birds as well. And then University of Rhode Island found that berries that are found on native plants are more valuable, higher fat, better fat content. I want to give another example at Sessions Woods, how we do early detection and rapid response. That at that curve, we want to get it early. We have winged euonymuses on the west side of our property coming in, and so we manage them. We don't want them to take over the understory like this. So we target them, we find where they are, so we don't let them produce these berries that the birds eat. And then as the bird eats the berries, then it flies and lands in a tree, then it defecates, and wherever it defecates, the winged euonymus will grow. So we rip them out physically and hang them in trees. And we also cut and paint the stems like we do the bittersweet. And it's very effective. And we prevent the spread of that plant, this winged euonymus, from getting deeper into our property. It's a challenge, but it's effective if you do it, especially if you get them early. Everybody plants winged euonymus for the bright color, and I always point out that there's plenty of native bright colors. This is high bush blueberry. Native, beautiful red color. Nobody thinks about planting a blueberry for their gardens or for their landscape. They only think of planting it for their, they plant it for their garden to get pancake food, right? Pancake berries, berries for the pies, but they don't think of it as a landscape plant. So the ecological value of a native high bush blueberry not only feeds a specific bumblebee that pollinates it, but it feeds an abundance of songbirds and other native fauna, and it produces also a beautiful color. This is a picture I took of one out east. Driving along, and I always challenge my wife and kids about, hey, what is that? What kind of plant is that? And this will look like a burning bush, but then you looked at it closely, it's a high bush blueberry, old. Farmer probably planted it for the blueberries, and it's an old one. Very valuable plant for ecological significance, not just for the blueberries. The dogwoods, anytime you add dogwoods, just biologically diverse. When you're making that field and then you want to have edge plants, the dogwoods are great edge plants. The flowering dogwood's a tree. There's gray dogwood, there's silky dogwood, there's red twig dogwood. All of these produce beautiful berries. This is a short list, well, a long list from the food habits literature of what eats the berries of the dogwoods. And right now, these are flowering. If you drive around, you'll see them on the edges of the woods. Beautiful plant. Another great berry producer for shade is the spice bush, which makes it's the larval food for the spice bush butterfly. And I just want to point out that it has instars. One looks like a bird dropping with a vestigial tongue. Is a fake tongue. The egg hatches out and they look like this. Then they end up looking like this with like a snake eye to scare the birds away. But the evolution of this, it's amazing. They lay their eggs on these spice bushes. They curl the leaf so that night they can sleep. During the day, they can sleep in here or, rest. And then at night they come out and they forage on the leaves. Just amazing. When I see a spice bush fly by now, I watch it and it'll go to a spice bush or a sassafras and it'll lay its egg. I'll see the little egg underneath as soon as it touches the plant. The old days, I used to just watch them fly by. Now you could actually watch and see them lay the egg. But you need the spice bush plant to sustain them. We collected many, many bags full of seeds of that plant, and we had it contract grown at a nursery they grew them for us, and then we planted them back. We removed 12 acres of barberry, and then we planted the native spice bush in place. And very, very rewarding to do that, to have, and you guys could do that as well. You could have it contract grown, grow them yourself, pick the berries, learn how to grow the native berries, or go to a nursery, have them do it for you, and then plant them back out. Very rewarding to restore the habitat that way. All right, where do you start? Okay, locate the map and map the boundaries of the area that you're going to manage. Whether it's a postage stamp lot or whether it's a bigger area, you want to map and locate what you have. Then you measure the area. You want to take a soil sample and have it tested. You want to decide on what kind of plants you want to put in there. Some of the hints I gave you today, the native grasses, the larval foods, the conditions of that soil. If it's a wet area, you want to pick seeds, plants that like it moist. If it's drier, you want to pick plants that are drier. But it's important that you do that. And then you want to prepare that site. You want to remove the turf, because turf will inhibit the plants from growing. So you want to kill that turf. How you do it, organically or chemically, it's up to you, or mechanically. But you need to remove the existing grass. And then you could plant by seeding it or by putting in plugs once you prepare that area. I know this is very basic. I'm not getting into the detail of it, but you need to bring the grass will inhibit the other things from growing. So you want to remove the turf, the real, the grass turf. Then you create a timeline. Jot down all your notes, figure out the area. Some of these companies, when you call them up for the seed, they'll tell you, you give them the square foot of what you're planting and area, and they'll figure out how many seeds per, acre or whatever unit you're planting. And I make a little sketch of the area. Why? Because it's good to do that, make an inventory. These little sketches, you could put them on your refrigerator. Now you could pay a landscape designer to do it for you, but it's fun to do on your own. And now you have iNaturalist apps that it'll tell you what plant you have when you're doing the inventory. And then I noticed the red areas, those are the invasives, because you got to manage the invasives or else they're going to take over your property. So, make a nice little map and map out the invasive areas and then the area that you're going to be planting. And then that soft edge, I always, where your lawn or your field meets the forest, you want to create that soft edge. So, section that area and then figure out you're going to put more trees and shrubs, small trees and shrubs that are going to make that gradual thicket environment. So you want to transition. So, make sure you identify that as well. And then always ask yourself, what is the habitat significance of these plants that I'm putting in? Does it have seasonal cover, food value? Does it like wet, dry, moderately wet, moderately dry? Does it have sun or shade? Make sure you map out the sun and the shade. And you want to pick plants that are appropriate. Now, you're going to find when you first start doing this, you might have your plants spread all around and seeded in an area, but the plants will find where they like it the best. So when they're flowering and seeding, you'll see that over time, your field, the plants will go to where they are most adapted to. But if you could predict that earlier, it's good. Try to plant things that are going to grow in that type of soil. And always ask yourself, whenever you buy a plant or buy seeds, look at that list of 97 invasives and make sure that none of those are on that list. I have a little publication that I wrote in 1995 that if you want to download it off the web, it's a little how-to guide. It looks at the seasons of the year and how to look at your surroundings from spring, summer, fall, and winter and improving it for habitat. And I give 3 different examples: urban, suburban, and rural in there. All right, action items. Observe nature. I found in my lifetime, as I observe nature, it unfolds the truth. It unfolds what it wants. Learning about nature requires observation. And the more you observe, you sit there with your cup of coffee or tea and binoculars, and you just sit there quietly and observe nature. The other day, I watched a house wren throw out leaves from inside a nest box. A mouse had brought in leaves, packed it, and it was throwing them out. I never saw it before, and I videotaped it. But I happened to be watching that nest box that afternoon, and it was doing that. It was throwing out leaves from the inside the box. It's pretty funny because a lot of people ask me, hey, what if you don't clean out a box? How come birds will still use it? Well, this bird was cleaning out the box. It's pretty funny. So now I have video of that. But observe nature. Observe that spicebush butterfly flying by, where it goes. Observe that. Follow that monarch butterfly. Watch it lay its egg on a milkweed. It's pretty cool. Watch the wild turkey bobbing its head and what's it eating, So learn to predict that seasonal plant and animal association. The mourning dove cooing. Where's it nesting in the neighborhood? Where's that evergreen that it's nesting in? And then can I add more of them? And, learn to predict those plant and animal interactions. It's a lot of fun. So it's very educational and it's very rewarding. I made an observation on the Connecticut River once. I was looking at a boat launch area. They asked me to make a recommendation for planting. So I started walking around looking at what's already in the area. And I noticed these linear, look like somebody planted a row of beans, 2 of them, one here and one here. Look at that. That's amazing. The action of the water buried seeds and then they started germinating. What were they? They were silver maple seeds that were being buried by the sediment and then they were growing in that linear fashion. It was really cool to see that. Now that forest is going to regrow on that sediment. Inventory the area you're going to manage. Inventory as best you can. Use iNaturalist. Use these apps, and they're very accurate. Inventory the area, or have a friend that knows some stuff about plants. Make a simple plan. You don't have to spend $1,000 for a plan, or you could if you want, but you can make your own plan. Sketch out the area and start making your plan. Simple goals: monarch butterflies, hummingbirds, native grasses, native wildflowers. You start, create your own little plan. Diversify your plantings. Never plant monocultures. Don't plant monocultures. Diversify. And increase the native plants in your area. And don't plant invasive non-natives because that's detrimental. And prioritize which invasives. Like I have to do that all the time. On our land, you only have so much time, so much energy, so much help. we picked the vines, knock out the vines. We know that we could knock them out. We knocked out Tree of Heaven because we knew it was one patch in one spot. You attack the low-hanging fruit, right? Whatever's the simpler stuff at the beginning and work your way to the tougher stuff. And then make location note on the map where the invasives are so you can go back. I found, Devil's Walking Stick on our plant, and I marked it on a map. So one day when I went there with a lopper and some trichopyr, I knocked it out. But make notes of where it is so that you can go back and treat it. 2 things to avoid in this work. It's called paralysis by analysis, where you get too uptight. You start analyzing things. It's difficult. It's not difficult. One plant at a time. You can start literally picking one plant at a time, making a square foot available of soil and start. You could put a piece of plywood on the ground and let the grass die along the edge. Pick up the thing 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and start planting in that patch of whatever native stuff you want. Or you could go bigger, it's up to you. But don't analyze too much. Start small, build. And then avoid what they call extinction by instinct. And that's where your neighbor has a truck, there's a sale down the nursery. You go down there, you pick everything that's on sale, throw it in the truck, bring it home, start planting it. You didn't look at the 97 invasive species list, and half the plants you have are all invasives. That's called extinction by instinct. So avoid these 2 pitfalls and start small and build. And you can create a very biologically diverse landscape. One plant at a time, you can make a difference one plant at a time. Planting a native and plucking out an invasive. Those 2 actions will make a positive contribution to the biological diversity of our land. All right, Matthew, I'm ready for some questions. Are you there?
Sorry, let me unmute myself. Yes, I am